Hello everyone, and what a great audience. This is incredible. Thank you all for being here this evening to support the arts and our community of artists. As an art gallery, we usually deal with visual presentations onto which we often hang words of wonderment or understanding. It's our fortune today to listen to the words and phrases by themselves as they reveal or create novel images, emotions, or even whole new worlds. Mitchell Giddings Fine Arts is pleased to introduce poet Ross Thurber and host the debut of Pioneer Species, his first book-length collection of poems published locally by Green Writers Press this year. Thurber's poems have appeared in Bloodroot Literary Magazine, Chrysalis Reader, and Vermont Life, and he was awarded an Emily Mason Fellowship at the Vermont Studio Center in 2012. Ross and his family live in Brattleboro, where they own and operate Lilac Ridge Farm, a third-generation organic dairy and diversified farm. Sharing our stage with their own works are Vermont poets Julia Shipley and James Cruz. Julia Shipley's debut collection, The Academy of Hay, is the winner of the Melissa Lanitis Gregory Poetry Prize and a finalist for the 2016 Vermont Book Award. James Cruz is the author of The Book of What Stays, winner of the Prairie Schooner Prize in 2011, and Telling My Father, which won the Cowles Prize in 2016. Before I exit, we offer a huge thank you to Andy Reichsman and Kate Purdy of Ames Hill Film and Video, who shoot and edit our artist talks and other events, making them available on Brattleboro Community Television and on our MGFA website. And between each poet's presentation, Andy is going to take a minute to mic each of the following speaker. So just relax for a minute or so. That won't take long. Also, books are for sale, as you probably noticed, by Antidote Books up behind. And be generous and buy extra copies for your cabin-bound neighbors. I think the authors are going to be signing the books as well. I think James Cruz is going to be speaking first, so he probably has a few words of his own, and then Julia, and then Ross. So I think that's it for here. Each artist will be talking for about 15 minutes or so, then the changeover, and at the end there will be kind of a free-form give and take questions and answers. So everyone, please welcome the three poets, but we'll start with welcoming James Cruz, and then Julia Shipley, and then Ross. Thank you.
Everybody, thanks for coming. I'm not sure if the mic is working, but hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So I'm thrilled to help Ross launch his first book, the first of many, I feel. I got the opportunity to read it long before it was published, and also to read with Ross a couple of times now, and his poems just transport you to a different place, but a place that feels very familiar. It's very much of the land, so very honored to share this space with Ross as well as Julia. So I want to start off with a poem that I wrote recently. Maybe like many of you, I've been thinking a lot about the light or the lack thereof, and I was looking out at the dawn one morning and just thought, you know, if I could just capture that gorgeous blue that shows up in the sky before sunrise, I'd be so happy. So this is called Light Preserves. If I had the power to preserve, I would not trap lightning in a bottle, would not catch even a spark of electricity in a key dangling from a string in a storm. What I'd want to save for later when winter whitens the windows and shadows overtake the room is the plainer blue of dawn, brighter today for the way it presses through the sky behind the line of bare black apple trees, their shriveled fruit encased in skins of ice like secrets held too long. I know this blue will never warm me with fire, but I'd still store it in jars on a shelf for the nights I wake sweating, twisted in sheets, and starved for the reliable light of another tomorrow. And this one is called Enough, and I think you'll get the gist of it, and it seemed appropriate to read today. So this is called Enough. I plead with the God of good enough today. Let me hear rain and not think of the hikes I will miss, the muddy lane it will make of our driveway. Let me listen instead and say enough. Let me imagine the cold needles of water slipping beneath the carpet of newly green grass to touch the roots of wildflowers and trees at last awakened by days of steady sun. Let me think enough, but not like a mantra, a prayer that comes more naturally, springing from the multi-layered folds of my mind like the simplest memory. We were shaped for praise, our bodies built of the flesh and bones of thanks for the unknowable force that animates us, wants us to cut a path through the world's clutter and distraction to that bright place of everlasting light inside. Enough the stained lampshade, the glow that fills the room. Enough the ashes leaking from the wood stove I haven't cleaned in weeks. Enough the slats of our floors and the beams that hold up this house, splitting and popping in the night like some God knocking, saying, please let me into your life. Let me make you grateful even for these sleepless hours, for the pounding heart, the tired eyes, the jumpy mind, the sound of rain. And so I usually like to share where my poems come from. And this next one came from one of those days where I was so busy just moving from thing to thing, chore to chore. And it happened to be a sunny day. And I noticed on the pillow of my bed, a single strand of my husband's hair was just standing straight up and just catching the light just so. And it just made me pause, and I was so grateful for that pause that I had to sit down and write this. So this is called Here on Earth. The sight of a strand of his blonde hair stopped me. It could have been a piece of woven gold shining in the slight imprint where his head had rested last night. But of course it wasn't, and looking closer, I found several more hairs there, each one just as golden, then got down on my knees to see them more clearly. And I tell you, I was changed by the presence of a few of my husband's lost hairs, waving in the wind of my breath. I kept thinking how close I came to never noticing them, how if I'd turned my head an inch to the left or right, I would have seen nothing but the blank field of a slept-on, sun-struck pillow. And who would I be, and what would we be, without moments like these to remind us just how thin our time is here on earth? A friend told me that if I wrote funny poetry, which I generally don't, I would call that hair on earth. So I've written a lot about my father. My most recent book, Telling My Father, is a lot about losing him, which he died about 20 years ago now. So I've been kind of processing that through poetry. But one of the most pleasurable things is when these memories kind of come to me that I totally put away and totally forgotten. And so this was one about a moment of kindness that I had just completely looked past from my youth. And this is called The Pool. Because he couldn't afford the kidney-shaped, in-ground pool we all wanted, my father went out and bought a used galvanized pool whose rusted rim I refused to touch. As usual, he had a solution. He split a length of black rubber hose down the middle with his pocket knife, then stretched it over the rough sides inch by inch until no rust showed. Back then, I never thought such gestures were selfless, evidence of what we call unconditional love. But now I feel my small hands gripping soft rubber, and I see my father on the back porch, cigarette dangling from his smiling lips as he watched me lift myself out of the pool, flinging cold water from my goose-pimpled skin as if I'd been reborn again. So I think I'll read just a couple more, and thank you all for coming out again tonight and for listening. This is another poem about childhood, and so this is about me wanting to do something again that my family couldn't afford to provide, but I found a way around it. So this is called That Secret Music. I longed to play the piano growing up, but there was no money for lessons and no one who could teach me. So my parents bought me a toy piano, a plinking, tuneless thing that made a music awful to the ears. For years, an ache stretched to my fingertips and stayed. Nothing could take it away. And though I don't remember the day someone placed a pencil in my hand and began to show me how to shape the letters of my name, the words for table and house, church and sun, I knew I had found my instrument. I loved the way the pencil's beveled edges rested against my thumb, which came together with the other fingers, almost at the point, to aim the lead at the blank lined paper laid before me. The muscles and bones of my hand somehow already sensing that secret music which lived inside words. So I'll end with this poem. A friend who read this book told me that I had too many great blue herons, and I should take some out, but I didn't, because they have followed me. I haven't necessarily followed them, and they continue to do so. This was about one that I encountered on a pond at a house where I was house sitting, and it's called Message. I wanted to capture that quiet moment after the heron splashed up from the pond, when a pair of wings opened wide in me and white space erased every thought I had. I could hear bullfrogs beginning to thrum their mud songs, could feel the blue blades of fescue lying down for the coming storm, but the chirping of the phone in my pocket broke the calm. And before the heron could turn to a gray speck among stacked clouds, I was thinking again, wondering who it was, then taking out the phone, tapping its screen, aglow with the image of a yellow envelope, waiting to be opened, my moment of stillness floating off with tufts of thistledown caught on the wind of the world's wild mind. Thank you all so much for listening.
It's like, okay, there's a lot of, hi, there we go. I'm Julia Shipley. I live in northern Vermont, and a funny thing happened about, I think it's like 5 years ago now. The Vermont Studio Center hosts Vermont Artists Week. It is something wonderful. And there's an opportunity for the people who participate, which are writers, sculptors, painters throughout the state of Vermont that come for the week and work, to share their work aloud. And it was a night when the writers were sharing their work, and I heard Ross's poems, and they are still walking with me ever since. The final line of the poem he shared was about a cow that had just given birth, and line was, "The burden is ours." And I just have been thinking a lot about gifts and burdens, and sort of how they're two sides of, or the front end and the back end of the same beast, or how you choose to see it. And anyway, it's an honor to be here tonight. It's about darn time to celebrate your book. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm just going to share a couple of my poems, and I'll start out with, I'll start out with a poem that is sort of about this time of year. I had an idea of what I was going to read, and then just based on the persistent rain, I thought, well, let's call those to mind. But here's a spring poem. The day we woke up with, and the day it is now. My turn to lure the sheep out of the garden. In my nightgown and muck boots, I fill their rubber bucket with 2 quick scoops of feed. The sky is still hooded with the same dark as the barn. I traipse halfway out between where I want them and where they are, waiting, a subtle form of pursuit. I know the one who found the gate incompletely latched and nudged it till the hinge splayed and let others straggle in to graze on tender lettuce, bean shoots, coils of peas. Morning starts with a wily increment, and soon the whole flock overtakes night. Now I try to entice that one sheep, shaking my bucket of grain inside her sight. While the mountains settle out of the plum sky, I'll follow all day. All right. The next one is my torrential rain poem. It's called Bird Count, and it has a little preface, something I overheard, so I can't really attribute it. It's some gentleman who said, "They feel the need to steal what is freely given." So this is my bird count. It's in 4 sections, but I'll just pause so you can hear the sections. I'm counting my birds. When the loon launches its dire, lutish cry, the notes pelt my skin, the sky shatters, and the pond dimples in rain. Porter, a toddler, hands me a turkey feather. Here. He gives me a thing, but uses the language of location. I jab my heaviest thoughts with his feather. The hen uses her beak to pull the egg under her breast, like a man tucks a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket. I took chocolate from the checkout shelf when I was Porter's age. Now I venture into the loon-cried rains to raid what the chicken gave. This next one is, my notes call it a messed up love poem, but I think I have a bunch of those. I think it's an aggressive love poem. You'll hear it has the anaphora form, this repetition and this sort of some language of adoration and some language of like, Okay, it's called The Cornfield. How I miss the cornfield, the lap of snow it held, how it was cardboard-colored mud, how they treated it like cardboard, crisscrossing, compacting, dosing it with ammonium nitrate, genetically modified seeds, spritzing it with atrazine mist. How I miss the tall stalks falling in the maw of his chopper, in the shreds snowing from the backs of overloaded trucks barreling back to the bunker. How I miss the geese settling in for a caucus and the two boys skulking down with guns as long as their attention spans. Most of all, I miss the rainstorms we heard breathing in the corn leaves, heard as wind and water pelting their ragged belts, crossing from far field toward us, heard as it approached, heard as it arrived, then felt, pecking at our hair and shoulders, as if we were the last stalks. Here's my other messed up love poem. It's called Migration of Baling Twine. Sometimes I love other people's poems so much that I try and write my own version. There's a poet named Nancy Willard, and she wrote a playful poem called The Migration of Bicycles. And it's so fun about how she's looking at bicycles and imagining their social lives, how they're in twos and ones and abandoned. And anyway, I wrote my version, The Migration of Baling Twine. I have seen it in the truck bed, one fat spool, quiet as a salt block, then rigged in the baler and sent to bind each bale twice. I have grabbed it like a man's suspenders yanking him to me, look here, or sultry, sweetheart, where's my kiss? I have seen twine unhold with one touch of knife, or in a bind his car key can saw through, divided the packed bale splays. I have seen these agricultural spaghetti, orange plastic, dun burlap, fungicidal green, drawn off 30 opened bales, grouped in hanks, slumped over a nail, or hastily piled, as on slaughtering day we'll have a heap of chicken heads, a heap of yellow feet. Here's a month's worth of yanked, chucked twine, plus milk filters, the newspaper, Dunkin's cups, mastitis syringe, purple latex gloves shoved in old grain bags for the dump, from which I have seen him take a bunch and deftly twist a halter for the calf, or link 6 to make a lead, or tie the milk house door open so the flies can go. One loop from knob to hook. Flapping tarps quit with a quick pass it through the grommet, cinch it down. Hoses hold their ovals with 3 snug wraps of a strand. I have seen it eel its way from one lump sum to plenty of crudish sutures like 20 extra fingers pinching, as if the farm were a wound or a bird they keep trust. Keep from blowing, crawling, falling, growing away. I have 2 more poems. One is called The Present, a tribute to The Burden Is Ours. The barn sits in the field like an opened gift amid the wrapping paper. One morning after the towers fell, while we cleaned the barn, he grumbled, "It's not like it's a church." Sometimes snow on the roof blends into milky white sky, then the barn appears to have an open mind. Remember those stone churches in the west of Ireland where weather ravaged a thatched roof, only cobbled walls and paneless windows through which a bird might pass, into pews of ferns? I kept hoeing splattered crap, ponds of urine into the trench. He followed with the wide shovel, tossing sawdust across the rubber mats. And where the altar must have been, sheep bowing their heads to eat. Another poet I love is Stanley Kunitz, and he has this fantastic poem called The Round, which is, it's a round trip of a poem. And so here is my draft so far. I'm calling it Provenance, is how I say it. I load the diary's ashes into a wide tin pail, the one with a pout, the one I carry out to the pasture, where I dump and fling its soots to sweeten the grass's roots, which will bring on lavish clovers later when the snow is over. Then when I'm lugging buckets of water to the grazing lambs, a line will spark my mind and I'll dash back to the kitchen table to let that cinder kindle the diary's page. Thanks, and now...
So everyone seems to be getting better at the awkward silence, it seems like. So. And this also does feel a little bit like a hockey game. So playoff hockey. Third period, here we go. It's an honor to have you all here tonight and share this book with me, and James and Julia. Really, to be in your company is a privilege. And they both spent a lot of time looking at the manuscript and making it something that's presentable to the rest of us. So, very much appreciate that. I also like to thank, and I would hope everyone would join me, and thank Jim and Petey for the use of this space. They're donating everything here tonight for this reading, and I would just hope that we can all be able to support them down the road as they continue their creative endeavors and supporting artists as well. So thank you, Jim and Petey. And I'd also like to thank Dee Dee and Green Writers Press for publishing this book. She does great work, and it's an exciting part of the arts community here in Brattleboro. And also the refreshments, and I feel a little bit like this is kind of like a high school play or something like that. Even though I never was in a high school play, my mom helped make some lovely desserts, and Amanda coordinated a lot of the food. So thank you, and also Ruth from Antidote for being here and representing the books as well. Oh, I should also thank Eric Aho. This is his painting that's on the cover of the book and the back. It's called Dutch Air, is the name of the painting. So I'm going to start reading a poem called Burn Permit. And there's nothing more dispiriting than starting to burn brush and then not succeeding. After dusk is spun to a silver thread, stitched through a green evening song, night shudders in like a horse cooling down. After hierarchies and frameworks have saber rattled and clicked limb to limb, holding steady through early high winds, roots blind and dumb hold fast to their secrets. Bloodroot kindle the first flitting lights across the grove, their white globes half full with this morning's passing shower. By how many graces till we know for sure that deep breathing night is here to stay? From the roof of a mouth of a wood frog to the paper from the town that says commence with your torching, free holding damp and hissing pile of April offering, a smudge pot island of hope and return. I'd like to continue the theme of sort of exalting Baling twine, and that's the beauty of poetry too. Hair, Baling twine, those are things that we don't have a chance to always just sort of spend time and think about. But this is a poem called Blue Notes. The grass is spellbound under a golden horn, with an ensemble that beachheads and slips into a groove. Windrows tedded at noon, raked and woven at 2, baled round 3 o'clock. The player's throat is dry, air-cured, with each green blade buzzing when summer enters the room. The fuel pump on the tractor chortles diesel. The cable on the baler splinters. The valve stem on the wheel is shot. Studs loosen from their rim. The hub cracks a high treble. Evening follows the rhythm section and trickles in. Bruised light is sweet on the metal. Shadows reach across the field and meet. Dew in her club dress will make rust float in a droplet. A fox with one sable leg arrives at dusk, cases the meadow, stays until closing time. And this next poem is called Interval. The sun washes over the calves lying in a pod in a pen, heads on necks and shoulders and backs. New pine sawdust smells like vanilla. Night ice holds on past noon. Red shadows on the snow, deep in the ravine. By 4 o'clock, we know the sap will not run today. Divinity shelters under a hemlock in the bright, slow-falling snow. Air brings a thaw of bergamot, steeped in the tannins of roots. So the title of this collection is called Pioneer Species, and it's an ecological term describing the plants that arrive on the scene after a disturbance, be that man-made or natural. And I feel like that is a sort of a guiding, organizing principle for me when I put together this volume of poems. Nothing ever really stays the same, even though we sort of think of ourselves, and in my case in particular, living on a place for maybe the third generation, it seems like things are staying the same, but in fact, things are always changing. And I love the term, and it's interesting because you could also use the term invasive species. And that's something that is sort of a threatening term that we use. But ultimately, it's about perspective and how we see things. And the idea of succession, things changing over time, is a term from the natural world. But I think as we put our overlayer of humanity on that, we probably come up with the word faith. So I'm going to read a poem, this is a haiku, and it's called Animal Husbandry. Every day they lick the salt block just out of reach. My job, put it back. And I know what my dad's thinking right now. He's thinking, we probably need a few more salt blocks. The heifers are going out to pasture at the end of the week, and you're right, we do. It's not fair to speak for him. This is a poem called When Storms Came in the Late Afternoon. We all knew they were coming. I called to the cows through the patch of pines above the east pasture, where earlier they fanned out grazing. I called, but they would not budge. Air, heavy, turning green and melancholy, choked with goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace. The meadow slope full of fallen halos. What could these angels bring that we don't have now? When I arrive, the cows look through me in silent unison, waiting, perhaps for something more. Thunderheads way up on the hill have already disbanded the lake, raked the mountain, approaching the valley with a heavy scent of mint and lightning. It's enough for one to start. A collective, reluctant rising begins like the end of a prayer, each one with her own accord and manner. I follow. My love is a disappearing form, melting into the edge of the wood. wasn't planning on reading this poem, but since my sons and nephew are here tonight, I normally don't get to poetry readings. It actually is, one would call it a captive audience. Let's see if I can find it here. This is called November is a Middle Distance. In the suppleness of these lasting days is a milk sun lodged in the throat. The doe-eyed woods looks back like a startled bride at her groom, foreign, hale, and in fighting trim. Winged seed jewels lay at her bedside, her summer gown pulled at her feet. There is a new edginess now, caving stone walls, making rusted barbed wire slack. A rifle shot? No. A dump truck tailgate ringing in the valley. The falling hammers metal upon metal. The silver piston case eases the bed down. The stakes are higher and unrepeatable. Hook rubs from antlers shred bark down to the bare stem. Hoof scrapes yield territories of musk and piss. Stay quick and silver, hemmed through this ineffable descent. You are a coddled seed, buried in the womb, a fire to tend to between empty volleys, missed trajectories, and months of echoing loneliness. Easter Blues. The good news has yet to reach us out here in the stale wood. A low backs in from the shore, stalling this heralded beginning under a 120-mile damp shawl. Poplar blooms spurt tattered lamb's fleece, strung out across the tree crowns, a carcass left from a poor king's offering. These remains are only scaffolding around a ruined church, feathers on a reptile, a widowmaker chunked by woodpeckers. We have suffered enough. I climbed the mountain to find a clearing. Across the valley, the worsted hills of New Hampshire are hung indigo and wait to dry out. I would like to start again. Back at dawn, look east. Remember you are rising too. And stop searching for the living among the dead. And I'd like to read a couple more. This poem's called Petal Drop. And this is an agricultural term for orchardist. It's when they roll out their sprayers, when there's a certain timing issue, when they have to tend to the small fruit that's forming on the trees. But this poem has nothing to do with that. The genius of spring is amnesty from falling. World on the rise. Funeral pyres by the river, bonfires on the moor. Even gravity is losing a foothold. Spirits return to green, aching grass and never even touch the ground. The last poem I'd like to share with you tonight is called Ground Truthed, and it's the first poem in the collection. And it's a term borrowed from engineering when you take your hypothetical plans and you field test them. Ground Truthed. Here's the long season of forgiveness. Love leaves only the lilies wanting from a ghostly harvest. The fruit was too green to pick. The stalks were torn from their roots. Soon evening spring rains will be the blessing and commission. Skin will be night air. Dawn-throated songs begin each day. I am a poor king, bird on a branch, stone picker, woodsman, herdsman. My stable's small, my fields flinty, pitched and far from the river. My vestments made from the blotted leaves of trout lily, stitched with lichen fast to the rock. Sun skiff under a passing cloud, a ranging coronation of grace and speed. Give up your grip. Let down the floodgate. The middling mountains will hold your silt, wing flaps, meanders, passing concerns. Thank you. If anyone's interested, James and Julia could come up here, and if anyone has any questions at all or not, but we'd be happy to field them if that's the case. Well, since we're doing all this, hopefully someone will have a question.
And there's no pressure now. If you want to talk to us afterward, we'll be hanging out. So if you think of one once the Q&A ends, which is usually what happens for me.
I'm curious about the community of poets and how you know each other and sort of how you felt either supported or not supported by the people around you, and just sort of in a sense, the earth that this all grows from.
Well, in my case, I met Julia at the Vermont Studio Center in 2012, and always respected her work and was moved by it, and then called her up or emailed and said, I've got this manuscript, and I was up in the Northeast Kingdom, and on a kind of a hectic, busy day, I dropped it off, and got that started the process, and then I met James through Dee Dee, and spent very careful time in his house looking over the work. I've benefited from being supported by both of them.
Yeah, I've lived in a lot of states, and actually I would say that Vermont has more support. I can't speak for other arts, but definitely for poetry than any other place I've ever lived. And I don't know if that's because there are all these institutions like Vermont Studio Center, like Green Writers Press, or if and I suspect it has more to do with sort of the welcoming spirit of the people, because in a lot of places it seems like poets are sort of competing with each other, and I don't get that sense here. There's a sense of support, and so I think that's one of the lovely things about living and writing here.
I think Vermont's an incubator space for poets and writers. I think there's more writers per capita than maybe in Brooklyn. And I love the interconnectedness of it. I met James at the Vermont Book Award, and I had been told that he had this really cool new book out, and we got to dive into it for 7 days, and I love diving into people's work. Really just taking on a collection and just immersing myself in it. And sometimes I think in some cases I know the poets' work better than the poets themselves, but I also feel like I know them better because I know their work. So, I think Vermont, I'm from up in the Kingdom. You're from over closer to Manchester area, I think. Yeah, and you're here, and I love how all our geographically we kind of all meet up in different places on the page and in person and ideologically and etc.
Yeah, and so Julia and I will be reading together again tomorrow evening for Poem City in Montpelier.
With two other poets, one from kind of up by me. Well, I guess, yeah, they're both, those other poets are closer to the Montpelier area. Yeah, yeah, it's fun to come together, for sure. And Green Writers Press is fantastic, bringing out fantastic work. You guys should be so proud that it's here. Woo. Go Brattleboro.
I'm curious about your creative work ethic, what your daily regimen or weekly, whatever your creative regimen is. I'm a painter, so if I don't sketch, I don't create finished works or even start works. So I'm curious about your process, your creative process.
I would say one of the occupational hazards of farming is you have a lot of time to chew on things, and there's a certain freedom to doing chores, having that as part of, at least I see that way, and maybe that's just a way of justifying a lifestyle, but the trick is getting those thoughts written down, and I think the rhythm of work and movement translates to poetry quite well. And so I think that's part of the process. And occasionally, through the years, Amanda's found these, funny little notes written on the back of a breeding tag for a cow. One side's blank, the other side says, "Breed this cow." But I'm actually, I don't mean to make light of the process, because it is important, and there is discipline and there is work ethic involved in producing art, and none of it comes easy.
I think my version of sketching would be, I do, the morning pages thing, or like journaling. So just a lot of free writing prose, but also morning walks, evening walks. And I just, I sort of think about the way Ruth Stone talks about, like being attacked by a poem that wants to just pass through you. And it sounds sort of, a little out there, but it seems to happen that way often. And so, just get a line or two, and there's this little itch there that I want to follow to its logical end. So hopefully I'm in a space where I can do that.
I have two strange anecdotes. Well, the first is we're entering into the growing season, where there's just so much to do that there's a lot getting done, and I'm engaged in it all, but not sort of present with it all. And then comes what I think of as the writing season, which is winter in Vermont, is really, my winter crop is writing a lot. But I'm a journalist, so I'm in words every day, and so on my computer screen is a mess of and so I dilettante back and forth between all kinds of things. But here's a funny little anecdote. I have two friends who are poets, and we meet up at least once a month for pizza to workshop. And lately, this winter, we started doing this thing where we'd get on the train in Waterbury, and we'd take the train down to Brattleboro. And while we're on the train, it's a writing residency. And then we get off, and we go get a sandwich, and we walk up to the library, and we workshop at the library, talk, and then we get back on the train and go back to Waterbury, and we have another writing residency on the train, and it's really great. But anyway, so it was earlier this week I was in town, for a moment there. Yeah. It was like Tuesday we came down. So I'm a Brattleboro interloper on behalf, or as a way of supporting creativity. There's something about the train where someone's getting me somewhere that I didn't need to go, but that's okay. But I'm not responsible for anything, and it's just great. So it's going to be harder once I have chickens and lambs, but I highly recommend Amtrak.
One thing I should mention is some of these poems were generated as part of a Tuesday night salon that I've been going to since I think 2008 or so. Steve's here, and he's part of that too. And so that's a really great collective kind of creative, situation.
You guys could get on the train and go.
Yeah.
Actually, you need to go south.
Yeah,
whatever. Never mind.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I took some notes from Ross's reading. I wrote down divinity under a hemlock, I wrote down succession to faith. And I wonder if you feel in some way obliged to take on the big themes of mortality and loss, or if they just find their way kind of unwittingly into your writing, if you think about that as poets.
I would say for me, they just find their way very naturally, very organically. When I think that I should write a poem about something, you know, I've tried to write about the political situation in our country right now, and it just doesn't work because there's that sense of obligation. But when I just let it be, much easier. It just happens.
And I think anyone involved in agriculture experiences the circle of life, whether it's just, you can't get away from it. And writing is a way of just engaging with it, just reckoning with it. It's kind of inescapable. That's my thought.
Yeah. I think the pulling back from when the immediacy is kind of a relief, you know, to be able to do that and experience that. And also I think poetry is, you know, it's a language that we all share, but we're lucky enough to sort of help tease it out a little bit. Well, any more?
I have one more.
Katie has one.
How important is it for you guys to be heard? In other words, with an audience in front of you. How important is that? What does that mean to recite your words, to speak your words?
Yeah.
I worked at the Vermont Studio Center in the late 90s, and I had been writing for a while. And even when I was working at the Studio Center and giving readings was part of just what you did, I didn't want to do that. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to stand up and read. And at the same time, when I am with a poem and I'm working on it, I want it to mean something to me, and I want it to mean something to you. That it doesn't have to be the same thing, but I definitely want to create something that has. I've been moved by other people's writing. I want to move others. So whether that means standing in front of other people and sharing it or not. But one of the things I learned participating in something at the Helen Day Art Center, Nathan Suter kind of welcomed everybody, and he said, "Thank you all for being here. Art without an audience is nothing." And I was like, oh. So, I'm not going to pass it to you.
Well, I happen to agree very much. I feel like it's a necessary part of the process. And I'm a total introvert, and I also teach, which is a very odd, all of this is a very odd space for me to inhabit. But there's something about it that I feel like each poem is a gift, and I want the gift to come full circle. And so to do that, I have to share it with others, trust that my work will find its way into the hands of others, but there's nothing like that sort of face-to-face contact. Or, I read for a benefit for the North Bennington Library the other night, and I read a poem about Vermont, and this gentleman came up to me afterwards in tears and shook my hand and told me, I had captured why he loved Vermont so much. And you can't get that if you don't actually put yourself out there. And so that's a very important part of the process for me. And just a little shameless plug, this coming September with another Green Writers Press poet, Megan Buchanan, we're creating the Vermont Poetry Festival, where we're trying to bring together a bunch of poets for maybe a day and a half, and just sharing side by side emerging poets, more established poets. So, because we believe that audience, transforms us, and to share that with others as well. So look for that.
I would only just add that I've had a chance to read in several different places recently, starting to support this book, and including the State House. Molly Burke was up there, and that was fun. But reading amongst family and friends is absolutely terrifying. And part of it's, I think, because we live and work in the community, and I live and work in the community, and so I think in that way it kind of feels vulnerable. But at the same time, I think when I've gone to poetry readings and heard poets that I admire, and hear them read the poem after I've read the poem, it feels like an entirely different poem sometimes. And I'll go back and look at it, and I'm like, I missed that. How did I miss that? Just by not reading. So I find that hearing them sometimes opens it up in different ways. Well,
I have one last question. So it just came to me as you guys were answering the last one, but you know how a poem sort of has a different meaning to each person as it's read out loud. Oftentimes, I think, because the images are sometimes abstract, I think each person sort of fills it with their own imaginings. But do you ever go back to your own poems, and do they take on new meanings over time? Things that you hadn't seen in your own poetry that kind of form new, it sort of takes on a new life to you, to even the poet over time?
yeah.
So I have I can't read it to you because it's still a work in progress. I wrote this poem, and then I kind of pushed it away because but it had this image. It was another Cornfield poem, and then it ends with the turbines on the back of the Titanic. Like, I don't know why I was imagining them as kind of gigantic plowshares and imagining kind of turning the soil in of the cornfield. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So I kind of pushed it away because, like, I don't know. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. Well, guess what? I live by the Lowell Ridges, and they put 22 wind turbines up that make the Statue of Liberty look like a little figurine on a cake top. I mean, they're just, and I was like, look, it's like my premonition. It's like they're looming like the Titanic turbines above the cornfield. I feel like I couldn't have, I'm making that connection. I don't think I'm prescient, but I did go back to the poem. I was like, whoa. So I don't know. Maybe if we really get into our imagery, there's, a subliminal force at work, and then later my favorite poet says, our poems are smarter than we are. So.
Who's that?
His name is James Galvin, and he teaches at the University of Iowa, and he is an ornery, tender, wonderful poet.
I think of his quote also. He said, all my poems are love poems. Which is the tender piece, I think. Yeah. I had a similar experience, actually. I do think that the poems are smarter than we are. And I also believe that any artist has a foot sort of in the other world. There's this mysterious force that's at work that overtakes us. So in my first book, long before I met my husband, I had this poem that I'd written about being with this man who was out working in the fields, and kind of bringing him this glass of beer, and these sliced oranges, and all this imagery from a farm. Well, I had never dated anyone who was a farmer. He's a farmer. And in fact, I read this poem, very, very rarely read it, but I read this poem when I was doing a reading out in Oregon, and then the next month I met him. And so there was this magical force at work. I wish I had the poem to share, but I believe that that kind of stuff can happen, but we do kind of have to come back and make those connections too.
Yeah. You both said it very beautifully. I don't really have too much to add. I think I'll put this on the leaves for a little while and see, come back to it and look at it. But I'd certainly have a graveyard of images that who knows where they'll end up. But yeah, this has been a wonderful audience and a lot of fun to share with you tonight. So thank you guys.